Hi, Phil Laidler, Director of Consulting at Telco 2.0 STL Partners. I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of the personal information economy and customer data, and really what is the opportunity for telecoms and what are the potential roles that telecoms can play in what is a critical evolution of the economy, but also of telecoms' role within the economy. And we've done a lot of work on this. Kicked off about a year ago when we held our first privacy event in Boston that was very well attended, and since then we've been working closely with experts from the World Economic Forum, from MIT, from Harvard, and from Microsoft and other key industry influencers in charting what is becoming a very rapidly evolving ecosystem around personal information and trust networks. So first of all, what do we mean by the personal information economy, or the PI as we call it here? Well, to illustrate that, I'm just going to run through some examples of how personal information can or is or isn't used today in the economy. If we look at car insurance, at least in the UK, if you want to get a new insurance for your car, I did recently, what you can do is you can go to a quote comparison website. This lets you key in information about yourself. It goes off, hunts for the best deal and comes back with some recommendations. The problem with this is that most of the information you provide, you have to provide it yourself. You have to provide it sort of on trust, but the information isn't always easy to get hold of. So you're asked for things such as your driving offences over the last 5 years, and often you don't have that to hand, particularly not going back so far. You're asked for your previous claim request, going back 8 years. There again, it's not always possible for you to have to hand the details you need. What you want to be able to do, at least what I want to be able to do, is say, look, can you go to my existing insurance company and can you pull off those previous claims history? Can you go to the DVLA, which is the authority in the UK that issues driving licence, and get the points and the information about my points off from them and make your decision based on that? I want to be able to allow the quote comparison engine to pull that information and safely and securely share it without sharing any more than it has to, without sharing my name, for example, with all of those insurance providers, and come back with a recommendation. And then I want to be able to confidently sign up for their service without having the risk and the liability of having inadvertently made a mistake. It's better for me as a consumer because I can get the better deal and I won't have to be concerned that I've mistakenly quoted information in error, and therefore potentially down the line I could suffer consequences when I do make a claim on my insurance. But it also helps the insurance companies because they can more confidently come back with more detailed and tailored quotes that meet my needs and reflect what I qualify for as a driver. So that's an example of personal information that can help all of those involved if it can flow more effectively. Another example is dental appointments. So if there's a dentist, they set up an appointment book. The big challenge for them is that people don't show up or are late or frankly clean forget about their appointments. Now, dentists can tackle this a number of ways. They can either send out lots of reminders to continue to get people to come, but ideally what they want to be able to do is only contact or remind those individuals who, for example, are more than 1 mile away from the surgery a half an hour before their appointment. And they don't even need to know who those people are. They want to be able to turn around to a service provider and say, look, can you just send a reminder text to all those individuals who meet this situation, in this case, are a certain distance away from the surgery at a certain time. And that service works for them because they can remind the people they need to, or they feel they need to remind about their appointment. It works for the individuals because not everyone's getting messages, and those who are getting messages are probably those who need the reminders. And overall, it's a benefit, and there is no personal information about location or about activities that is unnecessarily shared with any of the parties. It's all managed as a service by the service provider. Another example which we're all familiar with is in using a smartphone. You need to fill out a form. You don't want to have to be able to cut and paste or keep cutting and paste or entering manually loads of details. You really want to be able to just say, with a simple authentication process, please share these details in these ways so that I can proceed with this form. You don't want to have to keep filling in forms, keep remembering, keep creating passwords, and essentially that's a service for an individual. You want someone to take that off your hands. And that's a good example of agency. That's a good example of how personal information, currently it's awkward and clumsy and cumbersome to manage that by a small device. Finally, another example is a digital locker. So there's a locker in the cloud that's keeping my films, my photographs, or any sort of information I've got. And associated with all of that material I've got in my digital locker, there's metadata. There's information about the nature, the type of information I've got stored, when I like to view it, who I like to view it with, when I like to share it, when I got it, how up to date it is. And this information is incredibly valuable to all sorts of third parties, third parties that I might use for other services. And I might want to make that safely available to them in a way that is controlled so that they can better serve me, perhaps with offers, perhaps update me on the latest content that I'm interested in, perhaps bands who are touring my town, whatever it is. This is information that, if it could be made available in a way that I was comfortable with, would help me, but it would also help them in servicing me. So what we're talking about here is creation of multiple trust networks that are technical, legal and commercial infrastructure whereby individuals can consent to and benefit from sharing their data and either sharing the data with third parties or having services use that data for third parties. And let's have a little look at a couple of the words here. The first one is sharing. When we mean sharing, we don't necessarily mean that the data is given up and forgotten about. We mean that third parties can have access to it, and they may have one-time access, they may have access over a permanent basis, but that's something that the individuals need to be able to consent to and also benefit from. The next thing to look at is their data. When we talk about individuals' data, we don't mean it's something that belongs to them in the sense that it's their house or their car. We mean it's data about them, data of which they are the subject. So this is data that has information about us as individuals and our identity. And finally, services derived don't necessarily have to share the data. They don't have to make it available. In the example we saw with a dentist appointment, they can simply perform a service for a third party. A good example is search or quote comparison engines. Essentially, search engine, Google doesn't share much data. It provides a service, which is a click-through service. And these services need to rely on information about the individual to work effectively. So what we've seen, and particularly for those who are not familiar with this area, is that user visibility and control is critical for these trust networks to function effectively. And today, in many situations, what was called notice and consent, in other words, the process of scrolling down through some terms and conditions and clicking I agree, doesn't really achieve notice and it doesn't really achieve consent. Individuals don't realise what they're consenting to because hardly anyone reads it, and they're not really giving notice because they don't have any options. They either agree and then they can have the service they want, or they don't, in which case they can't. Where there is control, and a good example is Facebook, it can be far too confusing and granular. So Facebook opened up a whole lot of privacy controls, and it took other people to map out, and here's a good example of it being mapped out, all of those Facebook settings and how they are laid out and how they are managed. Realistically, very few individuals are going to dive in and manage all those settings in that kind of detail. So having too granular control isn't necessarily the answer either. And then we have to be a little bit careful about what we mean by control. When we say that individuals need to be able to control their data, we don't mean that they can go in and change it. So, for example, I can't go in and change my qualifications. I can't just say I have a right to give myself a PhD. It doesn't work like that. I can't claim that I've actually got no points on my license. No, what I should be able to control is who and how access is provided to that information, but I can't really control the contents. Finally, where this emerging information economy currently is perhaps least refined and needs the most development is around an exchange system. What we mean by that is today, often you're either in or out, so it's opt-in or opt-out, and you can get some benefits from that, but you have no real ability to exchange benefits. You have no real ability to extract or negotiate benefits against your personal data. And we think there needs to be a clearer mechanism for that exchange. In other words, a clearer mechanism for extracting benefits from sharing information about yourself. What I'd just like to look at now in terms of what are the roles for telcos, what could telcos potentially do in this personal information economy. I've taken this chart here from the US Department of Homeland Security that have got a project on trusted identities, and it quite helpfully simplifies out the key roles in trust networks. And the roles we've got here that are relevant to telcos are identity providers, and these are essentially players who are providing assurance that the person who is using a service is who they say they are. So they are providing the authentication, the validation of an identity. Then you've got, and here, interestingly, separate, you've got the attribute providers. So these are providers of data elements and data sets on the individual, all sorts of data sets on the individual, and they are essentially providing a level of assurance that the data about the individual is what they say they are. The other key player in this equation is the relying party, which is the upstream business or the public service that is relying on the information in order to be able to provide the service or make the right offer that it wants to the individual. We think at Telco 2 that there are some additional roles that need to emerge in the personal information economy, and one of them is a personal information agent. We've seen how complicated and difficult it is to manage all these privacy and policy settings, and we think that there is a role for a third-party personal information agent to act on behalf of individuals and help them effectively manage their identities. And that is a potentially interesting role for telcos or combinations of telcos and other parties. We also think there's a need for an agent for the relying parties, because when it's a relying party as the government or a big institution, they can engage effectively with the trust network. However, when they're a smaller entity, making sure that they're compliant and making sure that they operate as intended is just too much of a burden for them, and they won't be able to engage with these trust networks effectively. So they will rely on agents to act on their behalf and make sure that they're able to function and benefit from trust networks. Again, a big potential role for telcos in providing that agency. Finally, the infrastructure which all this is going to run, clearly that's always going to be an opportunity for telcos, because that's long been their business. And when we talk about infrastructure, we don't just mean the transport infrastructure, we obviously mean a lot of the logical and the commercial and the operational infrastructure to realise trust networks. So, really, in summary, for those telcos who want to participate and engage and become very directly relevant to their customers in the information economy, and not all telcos will want to. A lot of telcos will feel that they are there to provide connectivity, they're there to provide an underlying transport service, they're not there to engage directly as an actor in this, and that's fine. But for those who do, there is an imperative need for them to participate and identify which of these roles, in which way, they want to function, they want to operate in this emerging personal information economy. The next key takeaway for telcos is that these are going to be open systems, and telcos are not going to be able to control and monopolize any of these roles that we've seen. They're going to have to compete for them, and they're going to have to compete through them through customer experience, through building genuine trust as an asset with their customers, and for delivering service. Finally, and perhaps most critically, is the way that telcos and other players in the personal information economy are rewarded will unlikely be through direct subscriptions. In other words, they're unlikely to find that consumers will pay them directly to fulfill any of these roles. So a lot of the commercial and the value and the financials around delivering this are going to be indirect. They're going to be through delivering service to third parties. Whatever they are, the key question that a lot of telcos need to start working through in their strategies is what is the role, or the combination of roles they want to undertake in this. And of course, we'll be working on this, as we have been for the last year, going forwards through our research, through our events and through our consulting activity, and we look forward to continuing to explore this question with you in the future. Thank you very much.